Hello, and welcome to episode 40 of Expertise is Overrated, the podcast that takes the time to answer the questions you didn't know you didn't want the answers to. I'm Vib.
And I'm Sean, and neither of us has any clue what we're talking about. Before we move on, let's award the much vaunted Expertise is Overrated Tinfoil Award.
As a reminder, this is an award that we give out at the start of each episode to the person who had the most ridiculous point in last week's episode.
This was easy.
Clear winner this time, really, wasn't it?
This was so easy.
I think unanimously people wanted to give me tinfoil for this.
It's a good one because it's the sort of tinfoil where if you're ultimately proven right, it'll be fine.
Can't wait.
It'll be fine because it'll probably be good, but you just say it with such certainty.
I am certain. But yes,
So,
Blue Wizards.
Yes. So specifically, I think I'm giving you this tinfoil for the assertion that Bronwyn from Rings of Power is a blue wizard.
That's entirely fair. I mean, I feel
Because
there
she
weren't many
wears
characters
blue.
who escapes. Yeah, I mean, I'm nothing if not a simple man. But I also suggested that Nori could be blue wizard.
Yeah,
I maintain that obviously Gandalf is a blue wizard who turns into a grey wizard. There's all sorts of blue wizard shit happening.
There's all
Listen
sorts of
to the
blue
episode.
wizard bullshit floating around. No, but just very, very, very quickly before we move on to the episode, I just like to say, fuck off, British summertime.
Yeah, you struggled, haven't you?
It's been absolutely shit. Babies don't know that the clocks change. That's all I'm going to say on the matter. I'm so tired.
And I'm happy that they don't. That's amazing. Well, it's a good thing that we're recording this at 9 a.m. on a Sunday.
Yeah, our normal recording time is sometime between like 11 and 3. I just messaged you this morning at like, what was it, 7? Being like, so when are you
6 a.m., yeah.
when are you going to be ready?
It was actually kind of disturbing because I woke up, my alarm went off, and then I grabbed my phone to turn it off, and at that exact moment you messaged me to say British summertime sucks or whatever it was. I was like, this is very freaky.
That's amazing. That makes me so happy. But that's just by the by. That's my pet peeve. Farmers aren't a big enough part of our industries that we should be changing our clocks to suit them.
Ooh, my goodness, that's an early tinfoil shout right there. My goodness, we've not even got past the tinfoil section.
We've invented headlights. Put your fucking headlights on.
It's about circadian rhythms, okay? Just live with it. Deal with it. You'll recover. You'll be fine tomorrow.
Assuming she goes to bed at a sensible time. We need to move on because this is going to turn into a rant about British summertime. What are we talking about today?
Well, at first, maybe a slight point of order. Right? We've asked this every now and then in previous episodes, but we've been discussing the podcast a fair bit in the last few days off the back of some feedback. And I guess maybe it's just worth throwing it out there again if anyone wants to get in touch with us and provide some feedback. Are the episodes too long, too short? Are we really not worth listening to? At which point you have to ask yourself, why are you listening to us?
This is episode 40, guys.
Yes, exactly. If you've made it this far, then that's really on you. But yeah, just let us know.
No, it's a good point, well made. We've received some suggestions that we might benefit from some editing, which is rude. Firstly,
it's accurate.
But also accurate. So we will probably not this episode, because as Vib said, it's 9:20 on a Sunday, and this episode goes up tomorrow at 3. But we will.
The guy with a baby who's probably really off schedule is editing today.
Definitely my turn to edit, isn't it? Shit.
So you know who to complain to tomorrow.
But we will try to be slightly pithier, sharper, and more edited and more structured going forwards. I've just looked at what we've got on our schedule coming up, and no, we won't.
Yeah, and I mean, it's taken us for nearly 5 minutes to even get started with today's episode.
True.
So.
That's very true.
More of the same.
This is what you tune into, really.
It really is, yeah. But yeah, what are we talking about?
Well, this has all come from, we were originally, last episode, going to ask, in the wake of Thor, Love and Thunder, whether Marvel had jumped the shark.
Yeah.
But then obviously Rings of Power happened, and we decided that doing a review of Rings of Power was more valuable last time, and I think it was. But
I think it was, yeah.
But obviously, this is one of our every 10 episodes, we take a step back and look at something in a slightly more holistic and considered way, apparently. So what I think we're going to talk about, well, what we've agreed we'll try and talk about is the idea of power creep in specifically the MCU, although we might end up sort of veering towards the DCEU as a comparison at some point, because I think actually there is a valid comparison to be made. And just look at sort of what's happened across the MCU since 2008, when Iron Man released, all the way through to Love and Thunder, and just try and get our arms around whether there is power creep, specifically in the villains, but I think probably in the heroes as well, and whether it matters.
Yeah, and I think that's, I guess, the biggest question to an extent. Because we've sort of talked about this before, but I mean, just before we really get going, your thoughts on Phase 4 of MCU so far?
It's so mixed. It's the most mixed of the phases.
I think that's right, and part of me wonders if that's purely because we haven't had the conclusion yet, because I'm struggling to sort of think back to other phases, I think sort of in isolation. I mean, we've done a tier list of MCU films, but you put them all into context to an extent, don't you?
Well, this is very true, and if you look at each of the phases prior to Phase 4, they all have a capstone film. Right, Phase 3 has about 6 capstone films, but you've got The Avengers, Age of Ultron, and then Infinity War and Endgame. Now, interestingly, obviously Phases 2 and 3, their capstone films aren't the last films. They use Ant-Man and, I guess, Far From Home as a sort of gap bridger into the next phase, which is actually quite clever. But I don't see, obviously neither of us have seen Wakanda Forever, which I am very much looking forward to, but I don't see how that's going to be a capstone in the same way as the original Avengers film, or indeed Age of Ultron.
I think that's right, and I think in Phases 1 through 3, because you had the Avengers as always, you knew there was an Avengers film coming, and you could kind of picture what that was going to be like. In Phase 4, I think you're missing that, although part of me has wondered if that's if they're sort of trying to meta game the system almost, as in they know that that's what everyone was waiting for, and this is why they've come out with all these films that are slightly in their own world, even though they're not, even though they're all connected, but there's also all this multiverse stuff going on as well. So I think maybe it's deliberately confusing, and when they do eventually come up with some sort of some film that ties it all together, we'll think back and go, wow, well done.
Perhaps. I think Phase 4 feels disconnected, though. I think it feels disconnected. I think some of it feels barely coherent. But for all that, there's been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 of the 7 films are released. And I think we can agree that half of those were excellent. And I know you and I disagree on Doctor Strange, but Shang-Chi, No Way Home, and Love and Thunder were all great films.
Absolutely.
The problem is Black Widow and Eternals were really bad.
I take objection to calling Black Widow bad. It was
Black
just
Widow wasn't. It was
just an action film that may as well have been set anywhere else.
Yeah. It wasn't. It didn't feel like an MCU film. That's a better way of putting it. It wasn't bad. I just didn't care about it.
I mean, Ray Winston with the shittest Russian accent in the world. You've got to rate that.
All right, Russian Ray Winston. I'll give you. That's fair.
Yeah, Eternals was a car crash,
but somehow also great. In a sort of, what am I watching? How is this happening? How was this greenlit? Is this really? Yeah, no, that's where they're going. Amazing, sort of way.
Yeah. But so if you look at those as a phase, right? Because we have Black Widow, Shang-Chi, and Eternals, and regardless of what we make of them, that they're sort of a bit standalone. I think is fair to say. And then all of a sudden, it's almost like at that point they were like, "Oh, hang on, yeah, we need to do something with multiverses," and then they really just go in with multiverse weirdness.
Yeah, and all of a sudden Tobey Maguire is in an MCU film.
Yes.
Which, thank you. Didn't know I wanted. Turns out I did.
Didn't know he wanted, but not complaining about it either.
Andrew Garfield cracking Tobey Maguire's back in an MCU film. Yeah, go on.
That's the kind of content I'm here for. So the phase is confusing. But aside from that, I think we sort of discussed in the past that we think the major issue here is more the villains than anything else, right?
I think that's right. And I think the best phase to compare Phase 4 to is actually Phase 1, right? Because it's introducing a load of new heroes, essentially.
Yeah,
Shang-Chi, the Eternals. Well, I guess it's sort of vaguely introducing a load of new heroes, but it's introducing a new villain, it's introducing new concepts. And I think it has to compare most to Phase 1. And the villains in Phase 1 are great.
The villains in Phase 1 are great. But also the heroes are great, right? Because these are the Avengers that we essentially all know.
They are. That's true. But I think, as we've discussed before, the heroes were... Spider-Man is the quintessential Marvel hero, and he's not in Phase 1. So they sort of took a punt on the heroes that they were going to use, which I think was very wise. Well, no, it wasn't very wise. It was very brave, and it paid dividends, and it meant that they kept their powder dry so they could introduce Spider-Man at a later date and take more of a chance on Spider-Man.
Well, aside from the pragmatic reasons, which is just they didn't have the right.
Sure. If you want to be sensible about it.
Because there were Spider-Man films being released around that time. It's just...
Yeah, actually, that's true. That's true and confusing.
You know, not to say anything about Andrew Garfield, but...
Same as, I guess, true. I was going to make the same point with the X-Men, but I guess the same point is true. They just didn't have the rights to them.
But the X-Men, in and of themselves, are a bit weird because everyone knows Wolverine, and then very quickly, I feel that the knowledge levels drop off. Well, I mean, Professor X and Magneto.
Wolverine, Cyclops, and Professor X.
Yeah, and after that, you're like, who?
I'm sorry, Dynamo?
Yeah, so it creates its own problems.
That's true.
But by and large, yeah, you're right. So Phase 1, lots of new heroes being introduced, obviously villains introduced, so we get glimpses of the big bad. And yes. Perhaps this is maybe what we're missing in Phase 4. We don't really know what the big bad is, especially if you've not watched any of the TV shows, which are also complicating understanding of the MCU, is that you need to have all this other knowledge.
Yeah.
It's going to be soon that people need degrees to actually be able to watch Marvel in cinemas, you know?
It's really hard to work out what the jumping in point is. No. Is it just Phase 4? Is the idea that the Infinity Saga, so Phases 1 to 3, will be a sort of self-contained...
The problem with that is Black Widow, right? Because you can't watch Black Widow having not watched the previous films because it's really confusing at that point.
It's confusing. Why is the
main character all of a sudden dead? Died off screen.
It's so confusing. Black Widow almost just sits... I don't think it's a Phase 4 film. I think it's a sort of standalone stroke Phase 3 film. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, part of me wonders as well. Is I think they just wanted to give ScarJo a standalone film.
I think that's probably true.
They put it in Phase 4.
I think that's probably true. Was it also released at the wrong time because of COVID?
I think maybe that's actually right. Yeah, I think it was supposed to have come out much sooner than it did.
There's no MCU film between July 2019 and July 2021. So there's no MCU films in 2020.
Yeah,
I assume because COVID, but that might be a factor.
That could be a factor, yes, for sure.
It just came out at the wrong.
They still could have classified it as Phase 3.
They could have done. But we're sort of flitting around the core topic, though, which is power creep. And again, if you look at Phase 4, everything is so big and so scary, but also so sort of abstract. I think that's sort of where maybe a more useful question. What do we mean by power creep?
Well, I think possibly again, if we compare it to Phase One, right? So we take Iron Man, and the main antagonist there is a miscellaneous rebels in the Middle East, plus Jeff Bridges, who of course is excellent.
Yeah, I get the villain of Iron Man is Jeff Bridges.
Yeah. Then we have Thor. The villain is essentially a big Asgardian construct. I mean Loki, but Loki. They put Loki in as a sort of longer term lure.
Do we need to draw a distinction between threat, villain, and antagonist?
Or perhaps,
because in Iron Man, those three are the same essentially.
Yeah,
it's Jeff Bridges, Jeff Bridges, and Jeff Bridges. In Thor, the threat is the destroyer. The antagonist is Loki, but the villain is probably Lofi. Or is it Loki? You see the point that I'm making, though. Well, the villain is the sort of the bad guy.
Yeah, maybe Thor is a terrible example because
Thor is complicated.
Because Captain America, I think, is easier, right? You have Hydra and Red Skull. That's again all three wrapped into one.
Yes.
But they all sort of aim to also set up something more longer term. Although I guess when you watch Captain America without
you can just watch Captain America. You can just watch Thor. You can just watch Iron Man.
True, but you could also walk away from that and going, "Oh, Hydra were a fun, like, villainous entity that we don't ever have to see again."
That's my point. That's my point.
They stand a huge plot point later on, and so this is the thing with Phase 4 that we don't know yet, right? That this becomes relevant. But ultimately, with Hydra maybe the slight exception, none of the villains or antagonists or threats in any of those films are, to use in universe term, an Avengers level threat, shall we say, right? Like they're 1v1 fights, and like a lot of people could die, but ultimately like nothing bad happens. But then enter something like Shang-Chi, and you're already facing like a world-ending entity straight off the back. Same with Eternals.
I think
with Multiverse of Madness, like it's crazy the level of villains that we encounter in these one-off films, right?
Yeah, I think Shang-Chi and Eternals are a really good example of this. You can go to Phase 3 as well and look at sort of Doctor Strange, or even Phase 2. And I know we don't talk about Thor: The Dark World, but these are almost Avengers level threats. Doctor Strange almost certainly is. That's a universe-ending threat. In Dormammu, but
yes, that's true.
So
that's actually very true. So then, is there actually power creep? So I guess what we're saying is that Phase 4, every single villain that we encounter in the films is significantly more powerful or threatening than they previously have been, right?
Is that the hypothesis then? Is that what we're saying? So in Phase 4, the villains are in standalone films are disproportionately powerful as compared with the villains in previous films?
I think so.
Okay.
I think it's the way that you put it at some point earlier, right? That everything's so instantly full on.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's true. If you look at Shang-Chi and Eternals specifically as entry-level films, right? So Shang-Chi should map to either Iron Man or Thor or Captain America, the First Avenger. So should Eternals, right? Because we need to spend time with these. In theory, we need to spend time with those heroes so that we can come to care about the stuff that they're doing.
Absolutely. Like if you take Iron Man, the reason we care is because it's a friendship. It's there's some familial relationships going on, and you sort of start to feel for Tony Stark, the person, and you understand why he does that. And I think Shang-Chi does that to an extent because it mimics that relationship element of that. This is
with Wenwu, yeah.
But then Eternals, like it's so many heroes that are thrown in that you don't have any connection to. the threat is so ridiculous. Earth is going to explode because there's an Eternal inside it. No, there's a
Celestial.
Celestial inside it. Thank you. It's just what?
we need to be wary of just blaming all of this on Eternals not making any sense.
Disagree.
But, no.
Maybe this is what the episode. I'm hijacking the episode. Phase 4 is fucked because of Eternals. How about that?
I don't think that's actually an unfair assertion. But I guess my point is you can't look at Eternals and go, this is true for all of Phase 4. Because Eternals is just a batshit insane film. But I think actually Shang-Chi and Multiverse of Madness, and to a lesser extent Love and Thunder, are all suffering from the same thing. Now, the benefit of that Multiverse of Madness and Love and Thunder can avail themselves of is that we already know Doctor Strange and Thor, so we care about them.
Yeah,
so,
maybe
so we don't need to spend as much time with Stephen Strange before we care about this world-ending level threat.
But is that perhaps the issue, right? That they've spent 3 phases building the story of a Doctor Strange or a Thor, and they're Avengers that helped stop Thanos, the very big bad. So if you're going to make a film about Thor, he obviously has to fight someone worthy of Thor. In fact, 2 Thors. So then if you make another film in the same phase, say a Shang-Chi, you need something equally powerful. Otherwise, people will walk away from that go, that wasn't much of a threat, was it?
But you see, I think this is actually almost what I'm going to call the DC problem. I don't need to walk away from Shang-Chi thinking, oh, that wasn't a Thor-level threat, because it doesn't need to be. And the thing actually that sort of Spider-Man Homecoming showed us way back in 2017 was that really, really good films can come of low-level stakes. The stakes in Spider-Man Homecoming are so low compared to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and Thor Ragnarok, which are the 2 films either side of it. Saying that, I can't actually remember. Volume 2 is Ego, the Living Planet. And Ragnarok is Hela. But Homecoming is...
Actually, Ragnarok was world-ending, let's not forget.
Ragnarok was world-ending, I suppose. But Homecoming is just Vulture, who's just an old man.
And Black Panther is the same in a way, right?
Well, Black Panther's a weird one that I want to come back to. Doctor Strange... Well, you basically... So looking at Phase 3, stopping Infinity War, you've got Civil War, which is kind of low stakes, kind of high stakes. Doctor Strange, which is incredibly high stakes. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which is incredibly high stakes. Spider-Man Homecoming, which I'm going to assert is the lowest stakes in the MCU, except maybe Ant-Man, but Ant-Man's shit. Thor Ragnarok, which is incredibly high stakes, and then Black Panther, which is sort of mid-level stakes. And then obviously you've got Infinity War, which is as high as the stakes get. But the point of Homecoming is that while on a sort of meta level, the stakes are really low because it's just, can Vulture keep scavenging bits of Stark tech, essentially? It matters so much because while the villain is low level, the hero is almost low level as well. Now, obviously, Spider-Man isn't a low level, low tier hero, but they also do a lot of work making us think that Tom Holland's Spider-Man is just a little kid.
Yeah.
So that scene in the car, right? It's Michael Keaton, isn't it? That plays Vulture.
Yeah.
Talking to him in the rear view mirror. That's some of the highest threat in the MCU, I think. So your villain doesn't need to be powerful. Your stakes don't need to be high to make a good film. And I think that's what DC has missed. And I think that's what the MCU is at risk of missing.
Well, DC has its own issues that we may come back to in that Superman exists in that universe.
Yes, that's also true. Superman breaks films.
Yeah. But I think you're right, because Spider-Man Homecoming, a great film, b low stakes but still a great romp, and that's just a classic superhero film, right? You introduce your villain, you introduce your superhero, and everyone has a great time. And Spider-Man is also just a very beloved character, and I think because he's a little kid in some ways, right? And because a lot of the threats that he encounters are just what people deal with, especially teenagers, whilst then also just beating up giant sand monsters. So, but I think maybe that's then the issue. Instead of just power creep in Phase 4, is it that we're running out of heroes that anyone actually cares about? Maybe specifically new heroes that anyone cares about?
I think that's probably right. If I may put it a slightly different way, I think the issue is that we've had so many superhero origin story films now that Marvel feels like they can't give us a low stakes origin story. Because people will go, oh, it's just a shit Iron Man. You've just made Iron Man from 2008 again. I've seen this, and Iron Man was better.
Maybe, but I think Shang-Chi to some extent undermines that, because I thought that was a great film, almost in spite of the crazy overpowered threat at the end.
I think that's right. I think Shang-Chi survives despite having the same problem that Eternals has.
To an extent, and I think because you instantly connect with the actual main characters, and you sort of think, oh, these guys are interesting. They've got actual human relationships and concerns and worries, and oh, he's also a superhero, maybe. And then it all escalates, but that's what you liked about Iron Man, right? This was just a guy.
Yeah.
And yes, a very smart guy. Ultimately ends up being, Iron Man.
Yes, I think that's right.
But there's just something weird about Phase 4, and I think it is just the films that introduce the new heroes struggle in some ways. Again, specifically Eternals, I guess we have to unfortunately focus on that one because it's so bad. But if we take Thor, Love and Thunder, like a villain that was introduced in that is excellent, also played by an excellent actor, super strong, and he just come away with that thinking, well, that he could have used a lot more screen time, really, not just in that film, but in the universe in general.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. Sorry if you caught some typing in the background there. I'm trying. There's a quote that I want to look at from Mark Rosewater, who's the Magic the Gathering lead designer at the moment, which essentially is power creep is not a thing. And I want to drill into that a little bit, because I think power creep is a term that gets misused. So I can't find the quote.
Yeah, but you're now going to complicate matters, right? Because we're talking about a game like Magic the Gathering.
But I think I think power creep is a game term that's spilling out into other media.
Oh, 100%. But in game terms, it's easy to understand because, once upon a time, a 4 would do something good, and now you need to roll a 3.
So that's exactly right. But the point that Mark Rosewater makes with reference to power creep, and I'm not going to do it justice, and if I can find the quote, I'll put a link to the quote in the episode description. But the point is that power creep is the accidental, gradual unbalancing of a game due to successive releases of new content, which leaves older content underpowered. And your example is exactly right. So this will only make sense to people who play Magic the Gathering, but paying 3 mana for a 3/3 used to be standard. That's absolutely fine. That's a good card. In modern Magic, that is an underpowered card, because you should, like, the meta is that you would pay 3 mana for a 4/3 that does something, essentially. But the point that Mark Rosewater makes is that that's not power creep, that's upping the power level. Power creep is doing that by mistake.
I mean, I feel that that's a very semantic argument, but
I guess that's almost the question that I wanted to ask is, do we think that this is a mistake, or do we think that actually Marvel has done this deliberately?
No, but again, but see,
you might be right
it
that it
makes
doesn't
sense
match.
in terms of because they're games, right? They're games that originally start off with a certain set of rules, and in some cases they start off with a dice roll, right? And you know, there's only 6 sides to a normal dice, and so that complicates.
All right, Square. I live in a world of 20-sided dice.
No, of course, but
no, you're right.
My point is, you know, once upon a time you would have something that would roll 1d6, and that would do it. And then, of course, because you're releasing more and more characters, you want to create variety. You have to change those metrics, and because you do, the original characters look a little different. I think with it's a bit like having discrete measurements versus continuous measurements, right? The MCU is a completely continuous fluid organism.
That's true.
And they should have foreseen potentially in 2008 that they were going to make hundreds of films.
Too many films.
And placed everything into a context together. Now, again, it's hard to then argue for power creep, because if you take Iron Man and put him into Phase 4, he would still be Iron Man, right? So his power has not necessarily gone up, and he's still just great.
The Iron Man of Iron Man 1 or even Iron Man 2 compared with the Iron Man of Endgame are 2 completely different heroes in terms of power level.
Yes. But it's a natural progression. And Iron Man's a great example because you can actually see him upgrading himself.
Yes,
and he references it throughout every single film. It's like, oh, I've got nanotech now. You know, it's great.
Yeah, and it's actually really good because he has different suit marks, doesn't he? So
yeah,
you see it's, I think, most in Iron Man 3, where he's on suit like 47 or something.
So if we're going by your quote, I don't think it's a mistake. I think Marvel know that they have to up the power levels throughout.
Yeah, but in that case, is it power creep or is it just escalation? Are they just increasing the stakes time after time after time after time? And if so, is that a problem? Because we've already done half the universe. Where do we go from there? Or even Doctor Strange is more than that. Doctor Strange is the entire feckin' universe. Ego the Living Planet is like all sapient life.
So maybe we're just coming at this from too simplistic a point of view, right? Because we think, oh, we see villain is the bad, and bad is beaten too easily. That's kind of where I've come from with this episode, right? In a way, I see the God Butcher in Thor: Love and Thunder, and I think, oh, he's so strong, he's so cool, and then he's ultimately beaten fairly easily. But are we maybe missing the point then that in Phase 4 the villains necessarily aren't the villains, and that's not point. The real fight we should be focusing on?
That's an interesting point, because now thinking this through, who's the villain of No Way Home?
Yeah,
that's actually,
question.
Actually,
it's all Spider-Man who fucks everything up.
Yeah. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness.
Well, the villain is a heroine who's just going through a tough time.
Eternals.
Yeah, that I don't know.
Well, no, you can do this. The villain of Eternals should be one of the heroes. It's Icarus, isn't it?
But I think they try to do that too obviously, right?
Or is it
they make what's his name? The big twist reveal that he's actually bad. Is like, well,
that was the me messaging you. Have you got to the twist yet? Oh, that he's evil. Yeah, that one. No, not got there yet. Which I really, really enjoyed. No, I had a point here. The villain The point that I'm getting at is that the villains, which I think is the point that you're getting at, the villains in Phase 4 sort of don't matter because it's so much of Phase 4 is like hero introspection. The villains are
Maybe
just
that's
there.
right.
The villains are just there for the heroes to react to so that the heroes can grow, which is probably also true in the earlier phases to a greater or lesser extent. It's just more obvious in Phase 4.
Yeah, because it's really hard to judge the phase as a whole, right? In some ways, I'm sure it's not specific to Phase 4.
No, it's not.
But because we know Spider-Man and we know Doctor Strange and we know Scarlet Witch,
yeah,
you might argue that it's more interesting, therefore, to shine a spotlight on them and their problems and flaws. And yeah, and then they just have the villain, like, because ultimately the villains in Spider-Man, it's just a nostalgic romp because who doesn't like the Green Goblin?
yeah.
But ultimately, you know how that's going to end. Like, there's no real threat there because it's just, we're all here for the same thing. And I guess in Thor: Love and Thunder, but I think maybe Thor: Love and Thunder is therefore my biggest issue with Phase 4 in terms of the villains, because he was an excellent villain and he was kind of a sideline.
Yes, because the point of Love and Thunder actually is the Thor and Jane relationship, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Thor coming to terms with the fact that he can't save everyone all the time.
That, and also the price of power to an extent.
Yes, the price of it. Love and Thunder is really
those are all
good.
great themes. It's just then you sort of walk away going, well, what was the point of the villain? Other than to just give Thor a new sidekick, ultimately.
Yeah, and is the other question there, did you essentially use too good a villain to tell a story that you could have told using a less good villain?
Exactly.
Did you
That's
earn
exactly
your
it.
Christian Bale?
Basically.
Basically.
And is that indicative of power creep? As in, they could have used something like they did in Iron Man, which is just, essentially a guy. But they went for the literal God Butcher.
I think yes, I like that. So the problem with power creep isn't that the villains are getting stronger. The problem with power creep is you're using the wrong villains at the wrong time.
Yeah.
I think that's
and
good.
And is that because they think they no longer can get away with underpowered villains? It's hard to talk in these sort of abstract terms, isn't it?
Yeah. So Love and Thunder is a really good example for this because ultimately, I guess you were sort of right that Gore is defeated too easily, but at the same time, they actually don't beat Gore.
That's true, yeah.
Gore
wins.
He gets to eternity, and then they basically go, "Oh, maybe if we just had a conversation with him from the start, everything would have been okay." And it turns out the answer to that is, "Oh yeah, actually, it would have been." So, but they've also they introduce eternity, which is this just really weird, random, abstract thing. Love and Thunder, I just 2 minutes ago said Love and Thunder is great.
I did notice that.
It is great. It is great, but also it's so weird.
It's great, but it's also just it's weird. But I love that about it. But it's also just it's one of the it's like a Star Wars film, right? A Skywalker saga film specifically. If you dig a little, just any amount, you unearth problems everywhere.
It stands up to absolutely no scrutiny whatsoever. I did see something on, it was either Twitter or Reddit. I think it was Reddit, which was someone saying Love and Thunder is great because it's actually a comic book film in a way that very little has been up to now, in that nothing makes fucking sense and it doesn't matter.
And you can literally see the kapows jumping off the screen, right?
Yeah, you've got Love and Thunder should have been made in 3D. because you've got those, like those feckin' goats, which I hate, but you've got those like coming out the screen and all of that. But it's just a comic book film, and it's great because there's all these people. It was a slightly shitty pose, but there's all these sort of casual MCU fans who watch Love and Thunder and go, "What the hell just happened?" And then there's comic book fans who are like, "Yeah, that's what a Thor comic is."
Yeah. Actually, coming back to the goats, that's another sort of example of not necessarily maybe power creep, but if they'd introduced something like the goats in Phase 1, that's such an ex machina, right? It's they're like multiverse traveling, dimension traveling entities of immense power that they just end up with and become a comic relief item. And
the goats don't work.
Goats, they wouldn't have been able to beat the guy, right? So
the goats are weird because they use the goats to pull the chariot that's being along the Bifrost that's being generated by Stormbreaker, which has its own personality now, and its personality is that of a jilted lover.
Yes, envious of
Mjolnir. It's which we've never seen, but we've never seen that Stormbreaker or indeed Mjolnir have any kind of sentience whatsoever. You put that in Phase 1 or even Phase 2, and it just doesn't work. But Phase 4, they've just gone, yeah. So?
With Mjolnir, it's always been sort of implied, right?
Yeah, not in the way that you see it with Stormbreaker,
no.
Slipping into the shot to go, I'm still here.
Yeah, or misbehaving ultimately. Yeah. But no, Love and Thunder is a phenomenal film because it's got such strong comic book energy, and you just have to take it for what it is, and it's great. Taika Waititi, what a genius. But yeah, so is that our conclusion ultimately? That there isn't power creep, but they're sometimes just misusing. They keep putting in overpowered villains for no point.
Yes, is the meaningful question to ask? Can you do Love and Thunder without gore? Can you do the original Doctor Strange without Dormammu? Can you do Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 without Ego? Can you do Age of Ultron without Ultron? I think Age of Ultron is a really bad culprit for this. Actually.
How so?
Because this sort of comes back to the comics, but in the comics, Ultron is a Thanos-level threat.
Yeah.
He's ridiculously powerful AI. And in the films, he's just sort of a bit crap.
He weirdly becomes really crap once he becomes embodied.
Yes, yeah. And he's got this, like, I suppose it's a comic book level. Of course it's a comic book level. It's a comic book film. But you compare it to, Winter Soldier or Ant-Man. It's like such a Machiavellian scheme to float a bit of Earth up high enough using, I don't know, vibranium Stark tech, such that it drops back down and becomes like an asteroid impact and wipes out humanity. It's like, mate, you're an AI. Just nick all the nukes.
Yeah, or just literally turn the currency to zero.
Yeah,
watch everyone kill each other.
It's so needlessly Machiavellian.
But that is comic book.
But that is comic book. You're absolutely right. That is comic book.
I guess maybe the other slight thing is that throughout phases 1 through 3, right, anytime you encountered a really powerful hero, there was sort of an explanation as to why they were that powerful, and usually the explanation was Infinity Stone, something Infinity Stone.
Yeah.
whereas now we're in phase 4 and we have all these powerful heroes that seem to be powerful for no reason that we can discern other than they just are. And then you're left wondering, well, does that undermine the threat level of Thanos and the Infinity Stones to an extent?
So the suggestion that I've seen is that perhaps not for the Eternals, because that's an unsalvageable film, but for...
I might rewatch that just to see. It's really that bad still.
For Shang-Chi, for Doctor Strange, and for Love and Thunder, those are all artifact films in the same way that Thor, Iron Man ish. Iron Man might not work here. Captain America, Thor: The Dark World, Doctor Strange are. These are films that focus around artifacts, right? Shang-Chi is the Ten Rings. Doctor Strange is the Darkhold. Love and Thunder is, I guess, the Necrosword. And could it be that we're seeing the first signs of Kang in the MCU?
Yeah, this is something we have to obviously bear in mind.
We know that Kang is coming. Well, we've already seen him if we've watched Loki.
But that's the problem, isn't it? You only know that if you've watched Loki, whereas in phase 1, at least they have the decency to kind of show Thanos, as a thing. Right, because he's the one who sends Loki.
You don't see him. You don't see him till the very last phase 1 film.
No, but yeah, they introduced the threat in terms of the Infinity Stones, I guess, more than anything else.
Yeah, but I guess this is my point. The Infinity Stones, what do you actually have? You have the Tesseract, you have the Ether, you have Loki's scepter, and you have Doctor Strange's the necklace of Agamotto thingy, amulet of Agamotto. So you sort of do have Infinity Stones sprinkled through phases 1 through 3. But you don't know that they're Infinity Stones until you get to... I don't really know which.
No, but you're aware of some higher power tier, I think, or some sort of coherent.
But is that only true? Is that only true post hoc?
Perhaps, and yeah, I think that's a fair point. It's hard to know.
The problem is we can't go back to 2008 or 2012 and watch the Avengers and look at Loki interacting with the Tesseract and go, do I know that that's more than just a weird space bridge thing?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right.
I don't know the answer to that.
Me neither. But I think part of the problem is the TV shows. We've discussed this previously as well. They are becoming more and more relevant to the actual workings of the stories.
Yes.
The sort of threat of the Infinity Stones and all that is gone. Kang. Well, I mean, we know we're going towards Kang because Avengers: The Kang Dynasty is literally
it's a bit of a giveaway.
But it's the journey of how we're getting there, I feel, is just a little odd. And I still think so. For example, right, we can agree that Thanos was a universe-wide threat. Right?
Yes.
And then Thor: Love and Thunder introduces a pantheon full of gods that you're essentially telling me sat around and did nothing?
While Thanos went to snap them?
Yeah.
Well, I guess the answer to that is, well, look at what happened in Love and Thunder. Right, because they're presented with a threat not just to the universe, but to them specifically. And their reaction is to laugh, have an orgy, and eat grapes.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's true. That's true.
I think we're meant to take away from Love and Thunder that Gore might have had a point, and we've been slightly, what's the right word? We've had that fact hidden from us because the gods that we've interacted with have been Odin, Thor, and Loki.
Yeah.
Like, you're meant to come away from Love and Thunder and go, well, Zeus is a twat.
Well, yes, and you do.
and you do, but that's my point. That's that Love and Thunder is working to give us that sense of the gods, I suppose.
But then, equally, one of the things I didn't like about Love and Thunder is the credits scene.
Hercules.
Yeah, because that's almost the reverse of power creep in some ways, right? You know, here's Thor who's faced the worst things in the universe, and now you're just going to send Hercules? Really? Man's not even a god.
Well, I think the problem is we don't really have any sense of Hercules in the MCU.
But no, that's entirely true. And we actually don't even know if there's another Thor coming.
There isn't one.
If Thunderbolts is a Thor film, I've got no idea.
I was going to say I don't think it is. I think Thunderbolts is like an anti-Avengers
like a group, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Isn't it like Taskmaster and people like that?
Not a clue.
I've said that with more certainty than I really had any right to feel. But yeah, I think Thunderbolts is a like B tier Avengers group.
Yeah.
But I assume Thor is going to be in Kang Dynasty.
You would imagine so, yeah. You can't just bench Thor, although they have done that previously. But then, so let's just bring it back to our original point. So I think we've established that Phase 4 as a phase probably has issues, and maybe that's just because we don't know how everything is going to tie together.
I think a huge amount rests on Wakanda Forever, which we haven't seen yet.
It will do.
Because it has to be Phase 4's Avengers for Phase 4 to work, I think. As a coherent phase. There are films within Phase 4 that work. But for Phase 4 to be a coherent phase of the MCU, it needs a tentpole film like the Avengers.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have one. So it has to be Wakanda Forever because it's the last one.
What I'd quite like to see, because I think the reason that sort of we came up with this topic was so many of the films in Phase 4 I walked away from being like, well, that villain was super powerful and is already gone with very little effort in some ways, you know.
Yeah.
And then you have all these multiverses, and I think it's really hard to put everything in context. Like, what's the deal with the multiverses? How important is this? What we're going to see? And what I'm hoping for is that by the end of Black Panther, we will see that the fact that there are multiverses is a huge deal, and we still don't really understand the level of destruction that could potentially be unleashed at some point in the future.
I think that's right. And almost if you look at Endgame, I'm going to say some heresy here, but if you look at Endgame, you look at the aftermath of the snap, and yes, it was terrible. Yes, obviously it was awful. You see in Endgame the sort of garden of remembrance for the 3.5-4 billion people that died. But you get it from Captain America, right? Like, I saw whales in the Hudson. Like, the world is obviously in a really, really shit place, but it seems to be coping. I'm not saying that Thanos was right, because obviously Thanos was an idiot.
Sounds a bit like he was saying that even though his idea wasn't the best, he kind of got what he wanted.
No, that's not what
the desired effect.
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that it looks, from Endgame, it looks like
Thanos was
the
right. Yes,
world
say the word.
It looks like the world could have kept spinning on, essentially,
and be better off because we see whales in the Hudson.
No, not be better off. But the impact of the snap wasn't that bad.
Yeah, give it another 5 years' time, and people would have been happier.
That's probably right. It would have been a
Thanos was
horrible.
right. You heard it here, folks. Sean thinks Thanos was right.
You're not going to get me to say it. It would have been a horrible moment in the cultural memory. Oh no, I know what I'm about to say, and I can't stop myself saying it. Would the snap just have been the worldwide equivalent of the Holocaust? Like a horrible moment.
My word, that's a statement that packs so much into one very small sentence.
it's the wrong question, because obviously the Holocaust is a moment in worldwide cultural memory. But do you know what I'm getting?
I know what you mean. We discussed this many episodes ago. I think I made a very similar point in that while undeniably, utterly, absolutely dreadful, it was a force of change.
It was surmountable. It was get pastable.
Yeah,
which suggests that I think that the Holocaust was get pastable, which I don't. But you know what I mean?
Yeah. It an event like that, and this is why when they're dealing with multiverses and timelines and things like that, we're going to start talking about absolutes in time. I mean, there's a what if episode that talks about that.
Fixed points in time.
Yeah, and something like the snap having happened and having been undone. I don't know, maybe it's all getting very meta. I think we just have to say we don't really know.
No, but
I'm still excited to see what comes next, and I think ultimately fair enough then with Phase 4.
I guess the point that I was labouring really hard to make and failed to make was that, like, the snap doesn't seem to have necessarily been that bad, and I think maybe the point that the MCU is going to need to make in advance of the Kang dynasty in 2025, which is really not that far away, is there is so much worse than the snap coming. I guess that's the point that I'm getting at. You have to set up that Kang is worse than Thanos, and you do that by saying what Kang is capable of is worse than the snap.
Yeah.
But at some
there's
point,
still a lot of questions surrounding the snap anyway, in terms of did people actually die? Did they just disappear? Were they put into some pocket dimension?
Were they shunted into a multiverse?
Maybe all those sort of things will be answered.
Maybe. But I think you made a point quite well about half an hour ago on DC, which is essentially the Superman problem.
Yeah.
Which is there is no problem in DC that is not really fixable by pointing Superman at it. And if it's not fixable by that, what the fuck is the point of anyone else?
Well, but that's why they introduced kryptonite, right?
That's exactly right. That's why they introduced kryptonite. Because you have to be able to turn Superman off.
Exactly.
Any problem is fixable by Superman.
It's the only way you can get Batman involved, is because you have to nerf Superman to smithereens.
Mm-hmm. Because any Superman level problem, no one else can fix.
Yes.
And
it all
Superman can fix anyone else's problem. Yes. How
he will fix it.
And actually, if you look at Justice League, the whole plot of Justice League is how do we turn Superman on?
Yes.
To fix our problem.
Yes. And then they make a point of like showing up all the other heroes with Superman, right? You know, like how he outpaces the Flash.
How do they not see the problem with that?
I know, yeah.
How do you not see? Oh, actually, we actively prove that Superman is better than the rest of the Justice League put together, and that's how do you not see that that's a problem for your series?
Well, the DC universe is
has a lot of problems.
Something else. It is something else. Yeah,
which is actually why I'm really looking forward to Black Adam, because I think that Black Adam just doesn't care. It looks like it might be a film where they just go, yeah. So
that and Pierce Brosnan is a superhero.
Pierce Brosnan and Dwayne Johnson are superheroes.
That's going to be really good.
It's going to be so good and so bad.
Exactly, yeah. But that describes a lot of DC universe films, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
And I guess final note on that, I would say, really glad that Henry Cavill is going to be playing Superman again. He really embodies that role very well, but really sad to see that that's cost us arguably one of the finest cast Witchers we could have hoped for.
Yeah, that's a good question to, I think, discuss at some point. I've seen a lot of people suggesting that Henry Cavill should play Aegon the Conqueror, and I think they don't understand Aegon the Conqueror.
No, it's not about Aegon. It's about the gigantic dragon that he's
Yep.
riding.
Aegon the Conqueror is quite good and has a massive fucking nuclear weapon that he can use with no consequences.
Yeah. Although that's it, he probably could still take most people in Westeros in a 1v1.
Sure, yeah, but he doesn't need to look like Henry Cavill to do it.
No, but is anyone really going to complain about seeing more of Henry Cavill?
No.
Well, there you go then.
That's not the point. Also,
There
watch
you
House
go.
of the Dragon so that I can talk about it on podcasts.
That is the point of House of the Dragon. Okay, yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, they need to make House of the Dragon, and it needs to be successful so we get an Aegon the Conqueror prequel.
Oh, I think it's already reached that level of success. The key is not to make it 8 seasons long.
No, 3. It's a 3-season arc. That's all it needs to be.
All it needs to be. That's all we're hopefully going to get.
Also true. Right, I think we can probably slowly bring this to a close. No,
Slowly, we stopped talking about Marvel a couple of minutes ago.
No, that's true.
We once again asked a question that we wholly failed to answer.
Is there power creep in the MCU? I would argue no. I think what there is escalation, and I think the problem, as you quite succinctly put it right at the start, is that Marvel now feels incapable of telling low-stakes stories.
Yes.
I think that's it. I don't think that's power creep, though.
But no, it's not power creep. It's yeah. You're going with escalation. I think it's obfuscation. I think is the main issue at the moment. But I'm happy to be proved wrong, and they come back and say that was deliberate. But so power creep, no. Wow, we actually answered a question.
I think we should stop there.
I think we should stop there before we fuck it up.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Expertise is Overrated, where for the first time ever, we answered the question we set ourselves. No doubt, we've said some things that were either objectively wrong or downright offensive. As ever, feel free to let us know, rate the podcast and leave us a comment, or drop us an email at expertiseisoverrated@gmail.com, tweet us at @zeroexpertise, check out our website, expertiseisoverrated.podbean.com, or come join us on our Discord server.
If you're lucky, we might just argue with you in one of our upcoming episodes. If you're really lucky, we might call you an idiot. Next time, we're going to be back in the grim darkness of Warhammer 40k's far future, asking, are there wolves on Fenris? Join us then for more nonsense.